Hi folks, today we're going to be continuing my series on writing an essay and we're going to be looking at analysing methods. If you haven't watched the previous videos in the series, I suggest that you go back and do that before this particular video because then it'll make a lot more sense to you. So first of all, we need to know what analysis means. Well, this is where we examine the writer's methods in detail in order to explain and interpret them. So if you imagine that we're taking the text apart, isolating individual methods, so for example, personification, similes, metaphors, imagery, and so on, and then we're looking at really why the writer has used those particular methods to communicate their message. Now, I know that lots of you will probably have said these things to your teachers before because I hear this in lessons all the time. And common complaints that people make are, firstly, surely the writer didn't mean that. They didn't think about this. When you're looking at a motif, for example, well, they didn't think about having the motif of sunlight across the text. Now, I find it odd that someone might think that because surely someone who's creating a work of art is going to think about every single little detail. And yes, maybe we'll get some things wrong when we're analysing text, but I think it's very likely that authors will have put everything into getting those details right. So I completely refute that statement. Secondly, I do hear a lot of students saying this as well. Analysing that book killed it for me. I loved reading the book, but then when we started analysing it, I really didn't enjoy it. Again, I would refute that statement. For me, analysing the text means looking at the detail in the writer's language in a way that really reveals the artistry, the thought, the care, the message behind the text. So for me, analysing the book actually brings it more to life. Anyway, you can keep your own opinions, but I would suggest that analysis is a good thing to do. So looking at a couple of examples then, here we're going to start looking at titles of poems. Don't worry too much if you haven't read the poems, because, well, I'll explain that in a minute. So the first title we're going to look at is Divisions, which is a poem by Tony Harrison. And for our analysis, we start by looking at the surface level. So we know that division means separations. We can see that the title divisions is plural. So therefore we're going to have multiple groups, separations between multiple groups. And when we have separation, we've likely got conflict between these groups. After that, we dig a little bit deeper. So I know a little bit about the context of Tony Harrison, but you can probably work this out without that knowledge, that divisions could be between social classes, between generations, between genders, anything you can think of. We also might notice that divisions is an abstract noun. So abstract and concrete nouns are things that you can touch, that you can sense. Abstract nouns are ideas, so courage, hope, love, for example. So divisions is an abstract noun, and that suggests that these separations are static and unchanging. It's not a verb, it's not something that's going to be shifting, but it's a noun, something that's going to be staying the same. So I've got my surface level and I've dug deeper as well. And as I've been doing that, I'm just making sure that I'm identifying the relevant methods as well and using the appropriate subject terminology. Don't shoehorn this in, but it should arise naturally in what you're saying. So for example, I've highlighted these in yellow. The title is plural. Plural in itself is a method. We've got the abstract noun that I've mentioned and explained already. So make sure you're using that proper subject terminology as you're doing your analysis. Okay, it's over to you now. I want you to pause the video and I've got a list of titles on the right-hand side of the screen. Don't worry about reading the poems, don't worry about not knowing anything about the context of the authors or anything like that, or you might have already read the poems and that's brilliant. But dig into those titles. What do they mean on the surface? And then what can we find out underneath the surface? And then restart the video again when you're ready. Okay, hopefully you've taken a little bit of time to do that. I'm not going to talk through each of these, but I'm going to look briefly at Easter 1916, which is a wonderful poem by W.B. Yeats. For Easter, surface level, you're thinking about a celebration, family time, holiday time, we're off school, aren't we? If you know a little bit about the Christian story behind Easter, you'll know that it's about resurrection, which is about hope, it's about new beginnings. Looking at the date, you might think immediately, oh, that's during World War I. So there's actually a juxtaposition there between the hopefulness and the resurrection story of Easter and the suffering and the pain of 1916, which is right in the middle of World War I. You could dig beneath the surface as well, and think a little bit about how Yeats is an Irish author, and how Ireland was not as its involvement in World War I was quite a complicated situation. You might think about Easter, yes, it's about hope and resurrection, but it's also about betrayal as Judas betrayed Jesus. It's also about suffering. It's also about death. So there's lots of things going on in that title. Okay, moving on then, second worked example. Now this is a quotation from Othello. Again, for the purpose of this, don't worry too much if you've read the play or not. So it's one of my favourite quotations from the play, and Othello says, "My soul's joy." So this is at the start of Act 2. Othello has married Desdemona in the face of prejudice and racism and everyone stopping them or wanting to stop them from being married. He's married her. They've travelled into a war zone together across a stormy sea. They've been separated and now they've been reunited. So they're married and they've kind of come through a near-death situation. And Othello says to her, "Oh, my soul's joy." It's a beautiful moment in the play. So we're going to start by considering that surface level. Well, the tone. It's my subject terminology there in yellow. The tone is jubilant, it's celebratory. Shakespeare's looking at the positives of this marriage. Then we're looking at the word soul. Another abstract noun here, total coincidence there. We've got an abstract noun that suggests that love is deep, it's pure, it's lasting. You know, we use the phrase soulmates in kind of modern discussions about love, don't we? Well, it's that kind of idea. Digging deeper, though, we have something different going on. Look at the pronoun my, and that suggests an underlying sense of possession. If you know the play, you'll know that we've seen that already in Act 1, when Othello says, "I won his daughter," as if Desdemona is some kind of prize to be won. We're starting to learn that Othello accepts patriarchal expectations, and that then foreshadows the downfall of the marriage. Again, I've just picked out my subject terminology there in yellow. As I've said, the subject terminology should arise naturally out of your discussion of the text. Don't try to shoehorn it in, but use those words when they are appropriate. Okay, another task for you. So it's your turn. I want you to choose one key quotation from each of your A-level texts. So it might be this one from Othello, or it might be one from a different play. And you should hopefully then have about 4 or 5 quotations and go through the process with them. What do you see on the surface level? What do you see by digging deeper? And then go through your work and highlight where you've used the relevant subject terminology, just to make sure that you're hitting that brief on the mark scheme. Okay, and then when you've done that, start the video again. Right. We've done our analysis, we've probably annotated some quotations. Now we need to think about writing it up. And here are some really useful sentence stems for you. These sentence stems force you to look at the text as a construct. As English teachers, we call this being outside of the text rather than being inside of the text. If you're inside the text, you'll often find that you're writing about characters as real people. So Othello does this, Macbeth does that, Lady Macbeth decides this. Where that will help you to get the kind of lower to mid-range grades on your assessments. If you want to really get into those top grades, though, you'll be outside of the text, and looking at the text as something beautiful and artistic work that the writer has constructed in order to communicate a particular idea. And your essay will be driven by that idea, driven by understanding that key concept in the text. So first one then, outside of the text and looking at the surface level, ostensibly. So on the surface, the writer, so Shakespeare, uses the method, uses imagery to suggest. When considering personification, one is struck by through the use of the simile, whatever it is, Shakespeare implies. So all of those are forcing you to name your subject terms and to make it really clear to the examiner that you're looking at methods. Then the next set of sentence stems are looking below the surface, so on closer inspection. So here we're zooming into the text, we're digging beneath the surface. This sense of fear, apprehension, hope, joy is further developed by. And then looking at different arguments, whilst it is true that Shakespeare presents Othello as loving Desdemona, a more compelling argument is that this is undercut by the patriarchal expectations of the time. So using those final sentences there on the screen to balance different arguments. What does this look like then in practice? So on the left-hand side of the screen, I've got a paragraph that I've written up. Pause the video and just read through that paragraph and start the video again when you're ready. Okay, so as I've done in the previous slides, I've highlighted in green the surface level meaning. So I start with my quotation, then I've got that surface level. I've made sure I'm looking at subject terminology, looking at methods. So I've highlighted that word tone there in yellow. Then I'm digging deeper beneath the surface. So on closer inspection, Shakespeare casts doubt on the couple's joyfulness. And then again, I'm thinking about my subject terminology. So I've made sure I'm looking at the word foreshadows there. Right, your turn again. So choose one of the quotations from one of your A-level texts that you've been working with and write up an perfect analytical paragraph on that. And there are some sentence stems there on the screen to help you as well. And then start the video again when you're ready. Brilliant. So hopefully these tasks have been useful for you, just to have a little bit more practice at developing and deepening your analysis. Of course, in an essay, you'll have 3, 4, 5 analytical paragraphs, and you don't want to necessarily be using the same sentence stems over and over and over again. So to add a little bit of variety, here are some more suggestions on the screen. You might want to copy these out, print them off, and use these as you're writing up your next essay. Thanks very much everybody for watching. In my next video, we're going to be looking at some slightly more complex, more high level ways of writing up our analysis. So the next video will still be focusing on the analysis in our essay. So make sure you check that out.